Change happens. You get to choose what happens next. I grew up in Africa, in a little country called Zimbabwe, in the midst of a vicious civil war, and life was chaotic. I was surrounded by wild animals and army guys, and life and living was an adventure. It was an experience, and it wasn't guaranteed. There was no guarantee of tomorrow. That, I think, served as the backdrop to everything that has happened since. I served in the army for a while. I became a safari guide. I led extreme expeditions, and one day I had a really bad day at the office. I ended up to my waist down a hippopotamus's throat. I was trying to save a chap who had been attacked by the hippo just before me. As a result of that attack, I ended up having my life ripped apart, and I lost an arm. Shortly after I think it was the second surgery, I was laying in hospital and I was feeling pretty sorry for myself. And the surgeon who had worked on me, this incredible man, Dr. Ngube, he came up to me and he stood by my bed and he looked me square in the eyes and he said, "Paul, always remember this. You're the sum of your choices. You're exactly who, what, and where you choose to be in life." I remember lying there and thinking, that's real easy for you to say, Doc. You're not the one lying here with bits and pieces missing. But even then, I knew that the doc was probably right. At that time, I wasn't ready yet to take responsibility for what had happened to me and what had happened in my life. I had the pleasure and the privilege of leading the fullest descent on the Zambezi River to date. My prosthetist had built me a kayak paddle, so even though I had one arm, I could paddle a kayak again. And life was beginning to feel pretty good again. I was choosing what happened next, and I was making a lot of next right choices. And along the way, I met this incredible woman, and she lived in America, I lived in Africa. I chose to move to America and to set my life up in America. Along the way, I set up a foundation, a 501c3, the Templar Foundation. And life was good. Our foundation was working well, producing some great results. And then life showed up in spades again. My health went sideways. All sorts of amoeba, bacteria, parasites, pathogens, cancer and friends. I mean, all of this had taken hold in my body. And the doc ever so kindly told me, you best get your affairs in order, and you best get them in order quickly. And once again, life had showed up. Stuff had happened. And I knew that I got to choose what happened next. Divorce showed up in my life. And stuff happens. You get to choose what happens next. A couple years after I got the really bad news that my health was a hot mess, I got the message that I was fully restored to health, and I began to build my life again, and life was good. I had 3 beautiful children who I adored, and I loved what I did for a living. And then COVID arrived. And suddenly, a lot of my business just overnight, it shut down. A couple months later, June 28th, my 15-year-old daughter Erin died. And once again, I was thrown into stuff happens. I get to choose what happens next. And I still had responsibilities. I still had my other children. I still had their mother. We were all suffering. We were all going through this. And I needed to choose who I was going to be through that. Who I was going to be for my family, who I was going to be for my friends, who I was going to be for my work colleagues, who I was going to be for the people my foundation supported. I get to choose what happens next. That brings me to today. And the beautiful thing is this morning I woke up and got to choose what happens next. when people say suck it up and drive on, or come on, you get to choose what happens next, it can be a bit pithy. It can be a little bit like pop psychology. Like, come on, you can do it. The beauty of the work I've had the privilege to do over the last couple of decades is looking at what it takes for a person to be able to dig deep and drive on. It's work that we've done with the military, with private and publicly held companies. I've had the pleasure and privilege of working with a lot of the leading thinkers and doers in the world of optimal human performance. And there's a lot of science that supports how we get to do this. Throw a whole bunch of applied neuroplasticity into the mix, and then a lot of the research that's working with what happens in our body around neurophysiological coherence. We now know that building the capacity to stop and choose what happens next is a capability that anyone can build if they choose to do it. What I've learned and what people take away from working with me is very little about me, but it's about themselves. When the audience afterwards come up and speak to you and they don't actually talk about the hippo, they talk about what it meant to them, what's going on in their lives, and how they're applying to it. Yeah, stuff happens. But we got to get up and we got to choose what happens next. And it's on those days when it's real issues affecting real people and they're looking, how do I show up? How do I show up in my life for my family, for my friends, for my colleagues, for my business, for my work? How do I show up for me? I think those are the moments that keep me coming back.